Get your filthy, muddy stench out of my wealthy neighborhood. You low-class peasant, the arrogant tech CEO screamed at the top of his lungs, his face red with unhinged fury. He violently kicked the heavy bucket of rare, $1,000 koi fish straight into the open sewer drain. You are nothing but uneducated trash ruining my elite status. Let us freeze this exact moment. Look at this heartbreaking scene. An innocent father, covered in soil and mud, watching his precious fish suffocate in the toxic wastewater, while a man in a $5,000 silk suit stands over him, laughing like a maniac. It makes your blood boil, doesn't it? If you believe a person's worth is never measured by flashy designer clothes or a fake elite status, I need you to comment this exact phrase right now to claim your power. I choose to build my empire in silence and with true power. Write it in the comments right now as a promise to yourself. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel, because you absolutely need to see the devastating karma that is about to crush this arrogant CEO. Now, let us rewind the clock exactly 6 months to see how this disgusting nightmare actually started. Our main character is a man named David. If you looked at David on a random Tuesday morning, you would never guess his true identity. You would see a guy in a faded 5-year-old gray t-shirt, worn-out denim jeans, and muddy rubber boots. You would see him kneeling in the dirt, his hands buried deep in the rich, dark soil of his front yard. But David was not a hired landscaper. David was the silent mastermind behind a massive, multi-million-dollar digital marketing and MMO empire. He had achieved total financial freedom in his early 30s. His automated systems generated massive cash flow 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Regardless of whether he was sleeping or awake, he had the kind of money that could buy islands. But David did not care about showing off. He hated the toxic, fake culture of the modern elite. He found his ultimate peace in the simplest things. He loved the smell of wet earth after a morning rain. He loved the quiet focus of building a massive, custom koi pond with his own 2 hands. He spent his days hauling heavy river stones, mixing concrete, and carefully balancing the water ecosystem for his prized Japanese koi fish. More importantly, he wanted to teach his 2 young children the real value of hard work. He wanted them to understand that true wealth is not about what you wear, but about the patience and discipline you carry in your mind. Every afternoon, his kids would sit by the half-finished pond, their little hands covered in mud, laughing and learning about nature. It was a perfect, peaceful life, until a massive, obnoxious moving truck pulled up right next door. Enter Richard. Richard was the newly appointed CEO of a mid-sized tech startup that had recently gone public. He had just bought the mansion next door with heavily leveraged stock options. Richard was the absolute definition of fake elite. He drove a painfully loud, neon green sports car that he constantly revved at 6 in the morning, just to force everyone to look at him. He wore aggressively strong cologne that you could smell from 3 houses away. Everything about him screamed insecurity masked as superiority. He treated everyone in the service industry like absolute garbage. The delivery drivers, the mailman, the local landscapers, they all became targets for his daily power trips. And unfortunately, he took one look at David working in his garden and made a massive, unforgivable assumption. Richard assumed David was just a poor, uneducated laborer who had somehow managed to rent a tiny corner of this exclusive neighborhood. The harassment started small but escalated incredibly fast. It began with dirty looks over the property line. Richard would stand on his pristine, artificially manicured lawn, sipping an expensive espresso, and openly mock David. "Hey, dirt boy," Richard would shout over the sound of the morning wind. "Try not to track your disgusting peasant mud onto my driveway, okay?" David never reacted. He would simply smile, wipe the sweat from his forehead with the back of his muddy hand, and go back to laying stones for his koi pond. He knew the golden rule of wealth. Empty vessels make the most noise. But David's silence only made Richard angrier. Richard hated that he could not get a reaction out of this so-called peasant. He hated that David seemed so incredibly happy and peaceful despite looking like a common laborer. Richard's ego could not handle it. He needed to prove his dominance. He needed to crush this man, to feel better about his own stressful, debt-ridden existence. So, Richard started a malicious campaign to destroy David's peaceful life. First, Richard intentionally parked his wide, obnoxiously green sports car directly across David's driveway, blocking him in completely. When David politely asked him to move it so he could take his kids to school, Richard just laughed in his face. "Maybe you should buy a bicycle, peasant." Richard sneered, adjusting his ridiculously expensive gold watch. "It fits your social class a lot better." David just smiled calmly, called a premium black car service for his kids, and went back to feeding his fish. His absolute refusal to show fear or anger was driving the tech CEO absolutely insane. David was practicing the exact patience of the koi fish he loved so much, swimming calmly against the violent current, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, because David was not just sitting around doing nothing. Behind closed doors, in his private home office with multiple glowing monitors, David was quietly pulling up the public financial records of Richard's tech company. And what David found was absolutely hilarious. Richard was a complete and utter fraud. An absolute illusion of wealth. While he was out here driving neon green sports cars, wearing $5,000 silk suits, and demanding respect from everyone he met, his precious tech startup was secretly bleeding cash like a severed artery. He had taken on massive, toxic, high-interest loans just to keep the office lights on. He had bought that giant mansion next to David, using heavily leveraged, restricted stock that was practically worthless in the current market. Richard was drowning in debt. He was a house of cards. Literally one bad financial quarter away from total, devastating bankruptcy. But instead of fixing his own burning house, Richard became obsessively focused on destroying David's peaceful life. It was a sick psychological projection. He needed someone to look down on. He needed to crush someone else, just so he would not have to look in the mirror and face his own pathetic reality. The harassment quickly escalated from petty, over-the-fence insults to a highly organized, malicious campaign. Richard decided to weaponize the local homeowners association, the HOA, transforming them into his personal neighborhood strike force. He started filing endless, ridiculous, completely fabricated complaints. First, he went after David's beautiful organic vegetable garden. It is a complete and utter eyesore. Richard loudly complained to the HOA board members, standing on his driveway and purposely raising his voice so David's kids could hear him from across the fence. "We live in an elite, gated luxury community, not a third-world farming village. That disgusting dirt patch and those cheap vegetables are actively destroying our property values. He is treating this luxury estate like a peasant farm. I want it paved over immediately." Then, he went aggressively after the koi pond. Richard claimed the quiet, soothing sound of the water filter was giving him severe migraines. He claimed the expensive, imported Japanese fish were attracting common pests and diseases. He even went as low as secretly throwing toxic chemical fertilizers near the property line late at night, desperately hoping the toxic runoff would leak into the pond and poison David's beloved fish. But David was built completely different. He possessed this magnetic, intensely positive energy that absolutely terrified insecure people like Richard. David never raised his voice. He never threw a tantrum. He was a man who let his massive success do the talking. While Richard was screaming over the fence, his face red with fake outrage, David was simply kneeling in the soft soil, enthusiastically teaching his children how to plant seeds. "Listen to me closely, kids," David would say, washing the fresh, dark earth off his hands with a warm, joyful smile. "People who are truly strong and successful never have to shout to prove it. Look at our koi fish swimming right there. Do you see how they naturally and effortlessly swim against the violent current? They do not panic. They do not complain about the harsh water. They just keep moving forward. Never be afraid of failure, and never let a loud, angry, miserable person pull you into their storm. We build our wealth, our character, and our happiness in silence." He was teaching them the ultimate wealth-building mindset. True financial freedom is not just about having millions of dollars sitting in a bank account. It is about having complete, unbreakable control over your own mind and emotions. David walked the talk every single day. Right now, as you listen to this incredibly frustrating situation, I want you to think about your own life. How many times have you been pushed to the absolute edge by a toxic boss, an arrogant neighbor, or someone who thought they were better than you just because they wore a nicer suit or had a fancier job title? If you are tired of this fake elite class stepping on hardworking, genuine people, I need you to go down to the comments right now and write our promise. Type it like a prayer for justice. I choose to build my empire in silence and with true power. Let them know we are not backing down. Now, let's get back to the boiling point of this nightmare. The tension reached its absolute peak on the night of the annual neighborhood summer gala. This was the biggest, most pretentious event of the year for this ultra-wealthy community. Expensive champagne was flowing like water. A five-star catering crew was set up on the perfectly manicured central lawns, and everyone was dressed in ridiculous, flashy designer outfits, desperately trying to outshine each other. David really did not want to go to this circus, but he wanted his kids to experience the community and eat some good food, so he showed up wearing his usual clean, simple polo shirt and comfortable jeans. He was instantly treated like a ghost. The wealthy neighbors whispered and pointed. Richard saw his golden opportunity to strike. He had been drinking heavily all night, his face flushed with cheap arrogance and alcohol. He walked up to the live jazz band's stage, violently grabbed the microphone off the stand, and tapped it loudly to get the attention of the 200 wealthy guests. "Excuse me, everyone. A toast. A toast to our beautiful, highly exclusive neighborhood." Richard slurred slightly, raising his expensive crystal glass high in the air. The crowd politely clapped, their diamond jewelry sparkling under the string lights. Then, Richard's bloodshot eyes locked dead onto David, who was quietly standing at a table, serving a small plate of food to his young daughter. Richard's fake smile twisted into a cruel, venomous sneer. "And a very special toast to our local charity case." "David!" Richard pointed directly at him, his harsh voice echoing aggressively through the massive outdoor speakers. "You know, when I bought my multi-million-dollar home here, I was promised an elite community of innovators, CEOs, and global leaders. Instead, I have to wake up every single morning and watch a dirty, uneducated laborer playing in the mud like a filthy pig." The entire outdoor gala went dead silent. You could literally hear the wind blowing through the trees. The crowd gasped in shock, holding their breath, but not a single person stepped forward to stop it. They were too afraid of Richard's supposed power and wealth to defend an innocent father. Richard stepped aggressively off the stage, walking straight toward David's table, gripping the microphone tightly in his sweating hand. "Your cheap little vegetable garden and your pathetic, smelly fish pond are a massive insult to every successful person standing here tonight," Richard yelled, his face now just inches from David's. David's kids shrank back behind their father's legs, terrified of the screaming, angry man. "You do not belong in our world. You have no money. You have no class. And you have absolutely no power. Tomorrow morning, I am forcing the HOA board to vote. We are going to formally evict you and your little peasant family from this neighborhood. You are finished." Richard aggressively threw the rest of his expensive drink right at David's feet, splashing expensive liquor all over David's shoes. "Now take your little brats and get out of my sight before I have private security physically drag you out to the street." It was the ultimate public humiliation, the absolute lowest point of human decency. It was the kind of blatant, disgusting disrespect that would make any normal man lose his mind and swing a fist. But David did not swing. He did not yell back. He did not look embarrassed. David just looked down at the spilled drink on his shoes, calmly wiped a drop of liquor off his daughter's shoulder, and then looked slowly up at Richard. And David smiled. It was a cold, terrifyingly calm smile. The exact kind of smile a tiger gives right before the cage door drops open. Because what Richard did not know, what absolutely nobody at that pretentious party knew, was that David was not just some guy playing in the dirt. Over the past 3 weeks, David had quietly logged into his massive, million-dollar MMO network and executed a flawless, silent financial assassination. David did not swing a fist. He did not yell back. He just smiled that terrifyingly calm, absolute zero smile, gently picked up his daughter, and walked away from the gala without saying a single word. He knew something Richard didn't. He knew that true power does not need an audience. And he knew that karma was about to hit this arrogant CEO like a runaway freight train. Which brings us right back to the very next morning. The exact moment this video started, Richard was severely hungover. His ego still bruised because David had not cowered or begged at the party. He needed to break David completely. So, Richard marched aggressively across the property line in his expensive silk suit, marched right up to David, who was quietly transferring his prized Japanese koi into the newly finished pond, and unleashed his ultimate tantrum. "Get your filthy, muddy stench out of my wealthy neighborhood, you low-class peasant," Richard screamed, violently kicking the heavy bucket. The expensive koi fish spilled out, gasping for air on the hard, dirty concrete near the sewer drain. You are nothing but uneducated trash ruining my elite status. David did not panic. He calmly knelt down, carefully picked up his suffocating fish with his bare, mud-covered hands, and gently placed them into the clean, fresh water of the new pond. He washed the dirt off his hands, stood up, and finally looked Richard dead in the eyes. "You talk a lot about wealth, Richard," David said, his voice dangerously low and completely steady. "But you do not actually know what money is. You think money is a loud car and a silk suit. You are playing a very dangerous game with chips you do not even own." Richard laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Are you trying to lecture me on money, you dirty landscaper? I am the CEO of a tech empire. I own this neighborhood." "No, Richard," David replied softly, pulling a sleek black smartphone out of his muddy jeans. "The bank owns your neighborhood. The bank owns your house. The bank owns your car. And as of 9 a.m. this morning, I own the bank." Richard froze. The ugly smirk slowly started to melt off his face. "What? What kind of psychotic nonsense are you talking about?" Richard stammered. David tapped a single button on his screen. "Over the last 5 years, my automated digital networks have generated enough liquid cash to establish a private equity firm, a very quiet, very aggressive private equity firm. 3 weeks ago, when you first insulted my children, I had my team do a deep dive into your tech startup." David took a slow step forward. For the first time, Richard actually took a step back. "Your company is a complete fraud, Richard. You are burning cash, your user base is completely faked, and you took out $50 million in toxic, high-interest mezzanine debt just to keep up this pathetic illusion of being a billionaire. Debt that was held by a private offshore fund." Richard's face drained of all color. He suddenly looked like he was going to be sick right there on the grass. "Last night, while you were drinking cheap champagne and screaming on a microphone," David continued, his voice cold as ice, "my firm bought 100% of that debt. We acquired the notes. And because you missed a critical covenant payment 3 days ago which you thought you could hide, I just executed a total margin call. I am calling in the loan, Richard. All of it. Due immediately. Right on cue." Richard's cell phone started vibrating violently in his silk pocket. He pulled it out with trembling hands. It was his chief financial officer. He answered it, putting it on speaker in a sheer panic. "Richard! Oh my God! Richard, where are you?" The CFO was literally sobbing on the other end of the line. "The accounts are frozen. The private equity firm just executed a hostile takeover. They fired the entire board. The bank is locking the office doors right now. We are completely bankrupt." The phone slipped out of Richard's sweaty fingers and shattered on the concrete driveway. "Oh, and Richard," David added, pointing at the massive mansion next door. "That house? You bought it using your company stock as collateral. Stock that is now officially worth 0, which means my firm now owns your house, too. You have exactly 1 hour to pack your silk suits and get off my property." The arrogant, loud-mouthed CEO, the man who had terrorized delivery drivers and humiliated a father in front of hundreds of people, felt his knees buckle. His legs gave out completely. Richard collapsed right there in the wet mud, ruining his $5,000 suit, weeping like an absolute child. He had lost his company, his wealth, his home, and his fake status in less than 60 seconds. He was left with absolutely nothing. David didn't gloat. He didn't scream. He just turned his back on the crying man, walked over to his beautiful, peaceful koi pond, and smiled as his kids ran out the front door to help him feed the fish. "Now, I want to ask you a very serious question. I want to break the fourth wall right here and look you directly in the eye. If you were standing in that crowd at the gala last night, what would you have done? Be honest with yourself. Would you have stayed silent like a coward out of fear of the rich man? Would you have laughed along with the fake elite to protect your own status? Or would you have been the only person brave enough to stand up and defend the quiet father with the muddy boots? Look deep inside your own conscience. If you believe that true justice always catches up to the arrogant, I need you to prove it right now. Go to the comments and type our final promise. I choose to build my empire in silence and with true power. Let the world know exactly where you stand. And hit that subscribe button, because the next story is going to make your jaw hit the floor.